So this is our inaugural webinar from the Center for Supply Chain Management at the Ludgert School, Florida Gulf Coast University. So our plan is to hold these webinars once every month, the second Wednesday, and integrate the industry in Southwest Florida, our students and supply chain experts, and talk about concerns, issues, developments, anything that helps us bring up the overall level of supply chain in this area. So we will talk more about us a little bit at the end, but I want to introduce our first guest, Charley Dehoney. Charley is the CEO of Freight Mango. And more than his CV, something I'll tell you about Charley that really impresses me. He is one of the very few people I have known in supply chain technology space who knows technology inside out. So I don't know if you share my experiences, most of you, but I read a lot about supply chain technology. I visit blogs, I read white papers. And when I read them, I feel that I read 3 paragraphs of just platitudes, just sentences. And but when I read Charley or when I hear his podcast on talking about supply chain or all these different places, so Logistics of Logistics by Joe Lynch, amazing podcast, I find amazing clarity of direct experience and zero jargon. So I'll start with that. I know I'm setting very high standards for you, Charley, but I would maybe have you introduce yourself to begin this, and then we can start the discussion.
Well, thank you very much for the kind words. I'm humbled to be the first guest. When you reached out and mentioned this project, I was enthusiastic for a couple of reasons. Obviously passionate about supply chain and logistics and technology. I love Southwest Florida. It's one of my favorite places to go. I fell in love with Florida many years ago and visit regularly. And lastly, super excited and passionate to start to see more organizations and institutions offer supply chain and logistics as curriculum. I think it is really going to produce the next sort of generation of leadership inside of business organizations, and we're seeing that sort of across the board. So bravo to all of you and Piyush, for the great work you're doing along with your colleagues. Like, it's really cool to be here. But I'm a career freight nerd. When I was your guys' age, I was in the Silicon Valley playing college football at San Jose State and in a business department with a sociology focus as well. And then wanted to be an entrepreneur, but like most college graduates, I had no money and no skills. So that like ruled out starting my own company. And I had to go to work in sales. And I interviewed with a ton of companies that I thought could train me and give me opportunity for mobility and advancement. And I happened to land on a shipping company. And so I started my career in 2003 going door to door selling overnight shipping. And at that time, eBay and Amazon were just becoming household names. And I started thinking, maybe there'll be something to this parcel shipping thing over time. And that company, Worldwide Express, has gone on to become a mega broker. But they really trained me in sales, business development, leadership, et cetera. And so after 6 or 7 years there, I had been fortunate to work for a couple of great entrepreneurs that were absentee owners. And I ran some franchises in Northern California. So hiring and training people older than me when I was in my early 20s gave me the experience and the opportunity to get some sweat equity and get off on my own in my late 20s and early 30s. I built and sold a couple of small supply chain and logistics companies. And I ended up selling them in 2014 because I caught the startup bug. In 2012, I rode in an Uber and I realized that was going to change commercial transportation and logistics forever. And I just wanted to be more involved with that than my traditional freight brokerage business or my freight forwarding company. And so I went all in on some startups, and I decided to sort of get my MBA through through experience, and helped launch the first Uber for trucking model in LA called Cargomatic back in about 2013. I was one of the first angel investors into that business. That was the first angel check I ever wrote. And then went on to work inside the organizations of ShipHawk and then most recently Airspace Technologies. So through my experience of business development, sales growth, and logistics, I've been able to help organizations sort of identify their initial customer base, build a business that's going to be venture fundable, help them attract the capital that they're going to need to sort of get the business off of the ground, and then connect with some of the larger enterprise partners that are out there in the space that are sort of looking for the technology or the visibility or whatever it is that service that these companies have provided. So it's been a great time to be in this space because I've seen it go from shipping was this obscurity and there was a couple companies people knew about, but now e-commerce has brought it to the forefront of all of our minds. And yesterday's fast is today's normal, and today's normal is going to be not even in consideration, in the future. So it's been fun to see this all kind of take shape, and then how now to be able to come together with people and have conversations like this, where it didn't used to happen like that for many of us on this call, but for the younger generation, like super excited to kind of be a part of your guys' journey and learning more about the business.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for that lovely introduction, Charlie. And just a note to the listeners here, I mean, freight tech and technology in supply chains is a massive challenge. Try to imagine this. When we book an airline ticket, there are 15, 20, 30 major airlines. That's it, right? When you're talking about freight technology or booking freight, the largest freight company, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Charlie, but the largest freight company would be what, 1.5%, 2% of the total market?
Probably somewhere around that. I mean, you're
probably
talking about
it's a
handful
super
making
dispersed
up
market.
10%, right?
Yeah. So it's a super dispersed market, and creating a technology solution with users, all of them on different technologies, different maturity, it's a massive challenge. So what Charlie is doing by setting up this first company, he's creating that first mover thing and kind of pushing the conversation ahead. So that's where it's very challenging. So Charlie, again, to start, how did we come to this situation? When we talked about supply chain, we hardly ever talked about technology. We were talking about the same old business model for 30 years. How did we come to where we are today when we're talking of angel investors in supply chain and all this kind of situation? What changed?
So, what's happened is, the internet brought about the perfect confluence of technology advancements, and then, that attracts the interest of the investors first in the early stage, and then now in the later stage, and the public markets. So the advancements in the technology and the access to capital has fueled this boom in supply chain technology growth. And really the key trend, the obvious trend that we were all just talking about, at the onset of the call, is the boom in e-commerce. For you younger folks on the call, you guys get everything delivered. It's probably really sickening for you to have to do an offline transaction. Heaven forbid you have to carry cash. And you look at those trends and it's just like, it's not going to change. People are not going to go back to living less conveniently. It's only going to kind of advance the other way. And so as the younger generation comes into the enterprise, the digitization of the enterprise is now forcing companies from the bottom up to innovate and create technological solutions just to make sort of daily operations more comfortable inside businesses, as well as to be able to compete through automation. So you've got all of these sort of like trends coming down at the same time. And by the way, the executives in every single corner of every single industry are getting pressure from the top down, whether it's their board or their public investors or just their competitors saying, hey, you've got to digitize, you've got to digitize. So I think it's really been sort of like covered from all angles now. And it's just gone from being something that's cool and innovative to something that's like, if you're not doing it, sort of you're asleep.
Yeah. All right, thank you. Amazing. So just to lead on to this question, let's suppose I am Robert, or I'm a company. I have a small company, a family business, a medium-sized company. How should I be thinking about technology? And how should I plan that technology journey?
Well, first of all, Robert, I'm a huge fan of your regional footprint down there. It actually came up at a FreightWaves convention recently, before everything shut down. Just how unique your sort of overall operation is, and how keeping that thing closely held over the years has served you guys well. So congratulations on the success.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
No doubt. So I would say that Robert,
I mean, we're just using him as an exemplar.
Yeah,
Sorry,
Robert inevitably has a technology strategy in place, and would be really interested in hearing about that. But really, any corporate leader in any organization at any stage of any corporate life cycle right now has to have a plan for technology. And I think what everybody's really become desensitized to and accustomed to over the past probably 10 or 15 years is this idea that your technology is never done. Like, you never have it all built. It's always going to be an evolving process that's hopefully designed and engineered to meet the specific needs of what your customers are asking for. Those customers could be your internal customers, your operations group who's making you money every day. It could be your external customers. It could be your trade partners. But really looking for elements of automation and increasing of speed and accuracy and reduction of human errors and reduction of choke points and workflows, that should be at the core of technology innovation. I think we're already past the days, which in the early days of venture capital in supply chain logistics startups, I'd say that's probably 2014, 2015, you saw companies like Ship, SHYP, that come out white hot, attract tens of millions of dollars in funding rounds, and then they're gone a couple of years later. Well, that was sort of like, without oversimplifying their efforts, and they did some good things. So I don't want to come across like they're not, was not a good group. It was maybe ahead of their time, but also like a little bit like trying to build a dating app for the logistics industry. It's like, you've got to build something that's practical. There's got to be a market for whatever solution it is. And however you take that solution to market, again, whether it's reduction in costs through automation for your back office and your internal support, or you're taking these services and turning around and reselling them through providing a better client experience in your traditional services business, like a business like Robert's, kind of connecting them, meeting with the customers where they are and enhancing their experience and amortizing those costs over time as a customer relationship expense. Or if you're trying to build a new product and take it to market as a software as a service product, ultimately you've got to be solving a problem that somebody has right now for them to view your solution as being more valuable than what they're doing today. And I think that's the cool part about supply chain is we're all sort of attracted to this because it's a pretty reasonable, logical, pragmatic industry, right? You start with the end result in mind, you kind of work backwards logically, and you've got your solution there. And adopting technology that supports any element of that roadmap is how you should be thinking about technology first, not, hey, let's glisten up this user interface or let's make this dashboard that nobody's going to look at.
All right, thank you. So going on from there, a big question that I've always heard people, should they use consultants, ready-made products and just implement what they have? Or should they design their own products, build their own packages? What should they do about that?
So I think holistically, it's hard to, I think the question here is build, borrow, or partner, build, buy, or partner, right? Mm-hmm. If I have a problem and I think technology is the solution, should I buy something from the existing market? Should I build something in-house, or should I partner with somebody else that can kind of give me those solutions as needed in exchange for some other, product, service, arrangement, et cetera? And I think you can't have a unilateral strategy. Every single business is going to be different depending on where they're at in their life cycle, as well as, what the needs are, what industry they're in, and kind of what's going on. So I think the use case for buy something off the shelf is I always encourage, I'm involved with about 15 or 18 early stage logistics tech startups that I support either as an investor, an advisor, or board member. And I always encourage them to look at, if it's not core to your existence in business, if it's not something that makes you unique from your competition or something that you can turn around and sell your company for more because you've got this technology advantage that nobody else has, if it's not going to put you in a different category in your industry, you should probably think about just buying something off the shelf and moving forward. If it's going to be a differentiator and it's going to either create a technological moat around your business to make it more difficult for your competitors to come in and take your lunch, or it's going to fundamentally change your cost model or your cost structure and how you service your customers or fulfill your orders, or if you can shortcut a bunch of manual work in the workflow, and your business is all of the sudden operating at a higher ratio because you're more efficient, then you should absolutely consider building that, because that's going to fundamentally change the valuation of your company when you go to market and you want to do something, whether it's raise another round of capital, sell your company in a liquidity event, merge with a competitor. All of those things are going to help you command more equity whenever these transactions happen. And then there's still other solutions where it makes some sense to partner. And I think where we're seeing that right now in logistics companies and the supply chain space is there's this huge rush to live inside the TMS in every single category of transportation, whether it's your billing automation providers like a HubTran, which was recently acquired by TriumphPay. Those are two examples of two companies who have really fought hard to get TMS integrations in the freight brokerage space to enable payment automation on the back office, as an example. Supply chain visibility and tracking is a huge focus and emphasis for global shippers right now. And so all of the logistics visibility companies like Project 44 and Vision and Terminal 49 and Four Kites and others, MacroPoint, they're all trying to get into all the TMSs and have done these integrations. So I think those are really interesting things where a TMS customer is going to want visibility, but it doesn't make sense for the TMS company to build visibility because there's already 5 or 6 companies out there doing it. So that's where you kind of partner up with the existing providers out there to create some level of differentiation. So that's the kind of like 3 use cases there. And of course you can go on and on about some others.
Yeah, thanks. So we have these 3 steps or 3 possibilities that you talked about. If it's something that's not going to differentiate me, I could buy it outright. If it's amazing and that's going to get my valuations or customer satisfaction, I should build it. But if there's something which is good, attractive for me, and there's already people there, maybe I could partner. So that's something that what you're suggesting.
That's exactly right.
Just taking this ahead, since you talked about, we keep hearing of so many products. So at one level, as a company, I have an ERP, I have a TMS, I have a WMS, I could have a yard management system. And then when I'm dealing as a user, if I'm dealing with different suppliers, I have so many different TMSs or different company systems that I have to talk to. How do you get these systems to talk to each other? Wouldn't that be challenging to exchange data with all these systems?
Yeah, I mean, it's to varying degrees across, the different sectors of supply chains. You run into everything from the green screens that some of us on the call remember, pre-internet and when everything was on premise, and that's still, very prevalent in some of the largest logistics companies on the planet today. The majority of their team is still working in something that we would call DOS based, and doesn't, really operate very well with a mouse and things like that would just blow the minds of the young people on the call, which is fantastic. So you've got that all the way to the new cloud-based bleeding edge applications that are coming out right now that promise everything under the sun, and really have developed a lot of cool applications over the last however many years. So I think one of the more interesting trends that wasn't obvious to me a few years ago, that has really started to evolve over the last probably 36 months, is a lot of robotic process automation has come into this landscape, where now my old DOS-based EDI sort of enabled operating system that powers the workforce of the masses in the supply chain industry. Now there's some connectivity agents out there like an RPA Labs or a Chain.io, companies that have done a fantastic job going out there and integrating into the old school, old guard, mainframe-based type systems, the applications. Companies like Descartes has even gone out there and really built some innovative sort of EDI to API connection tools out there that are allowing the legacy infrastructure of some of the older school companies to start to tap into the applications and platforms that are available now that are API enabled. So I think where, maybe a few years ago, people thought that APIs were going to replace EDIs. I think the more practical application here is that you're going to have your EDI standards. That's going to continue to exist. It's going to continue to drive the sort of majority of the transactions for a number of years. API is coming in, it's enhancing, it's tapping in, it's starting to build momentum and really hit critical mass. And then still there's this conversation out there about like, when does blockchain really make its mainstream entry, into the world of communications? And I think ultimately, if and when it does, it becomes another standard. I don't think there's going to be one that replaces the other. I think we're now dealing with multiple methods of communication and connectivity. And before you guys graduate officially, there may be another, right? And so I think adaptivity and sort of open connectivity and framework, any technology solution you guys are approaching in the future, think more about, yeah, that's all great. These guys do this and those guys do that. Well, who's sitting in the middle? Who's the tissue, the connectivity layer in between all of them? That's a real interesting opportunity, in my opinion, right now.
Just a brief thing. Can you give us a brief 5-minute tutorial on what EDI is, what API is, and why did we move from EDI to API?
Sure. Yeah, so EDI, electronic data interface, is a standard of communication whereby certain events can be communicated electronically in a batch method, meaning a whole bunch of pickups have been recorded by a local trucking company, and they need to let Robert's railroad know that this cargo is on its way or has been delivered to him or whatever. They'll send him over a bunch of commands at once via EDI standard, then a batch format that a few times a day is going to kind of upload into his system and populate the information, allowing those two companies to conduct business together in a semi-connected way. And I say semi-connected because prior to the advancement of APIs, automated process interchange, prior to that, we had, either EDI or everything was manual. When email came out, it was like you'd get an email and you'd plug it into one system, and they'd take it out of one system, you plug it into yours. So EDI allowed that connectivity. API has this sort of always open connectivity where you tell your system what certain information means in my system and vice versa, and we can seamlessly sync information back and forth. So all of the sort of modern platforms that are conducting the bulk of e-commerce and a number of other sort of elements of supply chain technology today are more API enabled, whereas most of the legacy monolithic platforms of the sort of corporate world are still largely EDI.
All right. Okay. Thank you. So yeah, This is a very brief tutorial on communication, basically having different systems within and across companies communicate. So I remember when I started as a buyer, we would have a system to system exchange, but my manager would force me to fax a PO. What if the system failed? So even though we had that, we would still fax that 20-page import PO and then call up, hey, did you receive my fax?
Sure.
Which is really funny.
And they put it into a file, into a folder,
yes.
and then kept it into a cabinet.
And we would
crazy.
Keep it at multiple departments. The accounting department would store a PO. The insurance department would also store the PO. The buyers would store a PO. And precisely the PO that you wanted would be missing everywhere. So yeah, I'll open this at this point to the audience. Anybody wants to talk about their technology journey or any questions they have based on what you've discussed?
Let me ask Charles something. You mentioned early on that you had some part to play with Cargomatic, ShipHawk, and so on. My students are familiar with those, but what is your current journey?
So on the path with Airspace Technologies, the most recent company in the tech space that I co-founded, I saw a couple of emerging trends in both in my life and happening in the industry that kind of changed my outlook temporarily on what I wanted to do. So a couple of things. One, I saw that there was more capital in the industry across all asset classes, from venture to private equity to late stage. There was more money than there were deals and entrepreneurs. So it was a good time to think about getting off on my own. And secondly, I started seeing that there was more off-the-shelf technology available, particularly around process automation and visibility, than there had been before. So I dreamt up this idea that what if I could buy a traditional legacy supply chain or logistics company and digitize it? Could I create valuation arbitrage where I can buy the business for 2 or 3 times its earnings, and then maybe turn around and sell it for 10 or 12 times its earnings because it's, technology enabled, even if I didn't build the technology. So that was the thesis. And in 2018, at the end of the year, I moved my family from San Diego to Omaha, Nebraska. And with the help of a couple really supportive private equity companies in LA, we acquired a 50-year-old truck brokerage company called Manning's Truck Brokerage. And we quickly got to work automating a lot of the back office functions, building a growth engine, and ultimately turned around and sold the business 19 months later to a strategic buyer this past October for a handsome return. And since that time, I've been working on a number of projects. I mentioned earlier that I'm involved in the logistics technology space as an investor and an advisor. So I like to be quite active in that space because I write very, very small checks. I use my own money to do this. And I really like to help the founders with connectivity, fundraising, corporate partnerships, strategy, things like that. So that has taken a bit of time, but most recently, I joined a company that has been based in India called Freight Mango. And Freight Mango is a digital freight marketplace, eliminating the barriers for global trade for small to mid-sized shippers around the world. So we've partnered with some best-in-class transportation companies for less than container load and container load shipping. And then we've also married up all of the necessary elements and ancillary services to provide an end-to-end seamless transaction for a purchaser of goods anywhere in the world. So think about, in addition to a transportation service provider to transport the goods, when a small business is acquiring a container of whatever widget it is, they also need to secure funding, against that container to acquire it as working capital. They need customs, brokerage, and clearance. They're also going to potentially need some additional cargo coverage. So we've introduced all of those ancillary services into the digital workflow through Freight Mango, and launched that company actually just last week. It was covered in the Journal of Commerce, so I've taken the CEO role over there.
Okay, so I was actually going to ask, and I believe you may have partially answered what I was going to ask on that. What is the current state of, when I look at a supply chain, there's a flow of materials, there's a flow of information, and there's a flow of money. And all three have to be synchronized for a supply chain to be really effective. So what is the current state on that?
I'm so happy you asked, because freight fintech is a space that's had all of my attention probably for the last 18 to 24 months. Because to your point, when a delivery of goods, whether it goes on Robert's railroad or a container ship or a truck, when the goods go this way, the money goes this way, right? So somebody's got to pay for those items. So the working capital to fund those goods, or the freight factoring to advance the funds to the driver or the carrier for their transportation part of it. All of these spaces are really becoming quite interesting now, not only to the large logistics companies to enhance their working capital and their profitability profiles, but also to the investment world. So it's a space that's really, really heated up. Just last week, a company called TriumphPay, which is owned by Triumph Bank, their stock symbol is TBK. They acquired a company called Hubtran. Hubtran was a document process automation company that was about 5 years old out of Chicago, Illinois. It was a $100 million transaction, which is one of the larger transactions we've seen in the kind of freight broker software space so far. And it was all driven by TriumphPay's motivation to become an end-to-end settlement and payment processor. So what that means is, in the settlement phase of the finance life cycle, The bill has to be received. It has to be recorded into one of the systems Piyush mentioned, whether it's an ERP, a TMS, or whatever. And then that bill needs to be authorized and validated before it can go out and be paid. And then once it's paid, it might be an ACH, it might be paid via check. And so that process right there is being digitized quickly. So companies like Open Envoy have recently launched. They just announced a $6.5 million seed round just this week. And Open Envoy is reading all these financial documents, capturing all of that information, and then validating the amounts against the PO that it was initially issued against. So now you're starting to see these really people and paper-laden processes start to get digitized and mapped out, all in the name of making touchless payments. So it's a space that's red hot right now. And if any of your students have any ideas in that space, like that is one to just really absolutely spend some time thinking about.
So how is it shaking up the freight forwarding industry?
Well, I think the freight forwarding industry has been particularly interesting, right? Because you've seen Flexport and Freightos come out and really do a fantastic job of educating the market around digitized processes, and that, hey, ocean shipping and transport, air cargo doesn't need to be as hard. And I think what you're seeing now with companies like Beacon, which is Europe's answer to Flexport as a digital freight forwarder, is you're seeing Beacon has really evolved to more of like, I call it a wolf in a sheep's clothing. Which is how I'd kind of describe TriumphPay as well, as a freight factor company that was also facilitating the payments. Beacon has now become more of like, hey, we're acting like a freight forwarder, but we're really a trade finance company. They're spending more time and energy kind of building out the financial services and the financial products. So I think it's a really interesting time for companies like, Flexport has its own operating capital product. Freightos has its own operating capital product. And I think it's a really interesting time for service providers across all industries, whether it's manufacturing and logistics, to become that working capital connectivity device to their customers, to just streamline that entire process, going back to, you got to move the goods this way. The quicker you can get the money going back that way, the quicker everybody moves on.
Nice. Thank you, Raj, for the questions. Very interesting. So now you're talking about all these technology savvy suppliers. So an immediate question I can think of is, typically our supply chains have been dominated by users. So user company, these large companies would dominate. And like somebody I was talking to told me that after they started using freight brokerage, it's the first time that they ever could charge detention to their customers.
Right.
Because they said customers will hold up my trucks for 6 hours, 8 hours, and yet never pay me anything because they would, the data was not as clear. So how does this change the relationships between these users of logistics services and these suppliers of logistics services who are now way more technology savvy than they were before?
Well, look, I think with technology comes transparency, right? Those are two sort of like intertwined themes. And so similarly to what we're seeing in the real world right now, where social media is bringing this level of transparency and informing the society, in ways and getting people sort of attuned to issues that were going on that were maybe easily overlooked before they were kind of thrust in our faces by, real-time kind of coverage. So similar to what we're seeing in society, we're also seeing at the dock door, if the truck is being detained and they have to sit there for 6 or 8 hours, that digital breadcrumb trail and the proof that they need to kind of go back and tell, the shipper, hey, this isn't okay, you need to pay me. The other thing is truckers now have more options than they ever have between, working with, more large brokers that are out there that have come forward, all the freight marketplaces, companies like Neutral or Trucker Tools, who are offering smart capacity solutions to shippers and brokers. There's a lot of ways for carriers to optimize their rate per mile and their asset utilization than they had before. So I think carriers are more informed of what they're worth on the open market, hopefully. Rates have been up, which is good for the carrier, assuming they're balancing their previous commitments to the opportunities that come their way. But if they keep the trucks running and not held up, and they can go back in a data-driven way. That's helpful. And then I would also say that with this transparency has come more pressure on shippers, or has put more pressure on shippers to improve the driver experience. Like the driver experience of waiting at the dock and the days of, urinating out around the back shed and things like that because they won't, you share the restroom. COVID aside, shippers have had to put a better image out there for carriers, or frankly, carriers and brokers will back away from them. So still some of the largest shippers out there have a lot of that leverage, to sort of like not treat people well, but a lot of that has gone away with the transparency. So hopefully we continue to trend in that direction and everybody can continue to be more efficient.
Oh, yeah. So this is also a social side that technology is performing, that creating a better lifestyle for everybody. Even the drivers can enjoy some decency, which somewhere was problematic in our area.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, we're seeing, on the trucking side, on the over-the-road domestic trucking side, we're seeing sort of condensed routes, right? As distribution centers get put closer to the metro areas. You're also seeing a lot of really interesting technology-driven solutions, whether it's Baton, who's starting to kind of take freight and move it around local cities. And they just announced a big funding round, maybe in the last couple of months. And then also a company like Hall, which is a driver staffing company that's focused more on helping CDL drivers find better lifestyle fitting driving opportunities if they don't own their own truck and they're not a traditional owner operator. So I think there's been some really cool creative solutions that have come to market to not only decrease the length of the haul, but also start to think more about life inside the cab and how to make drivers' lives better. Everything from next generation fuel cards and payment platforms that are going to give drivers more options to, better rewards and perks at the fueling stations themselves, truck parking marketplaces. Their life has changed so much in the last 5 to 6 years with the ELDs that technology really needs to evolve, and the industry needs to evolve to support those guys, because they're what makes everything happen. Yeah.
Thank you. So I would just like to point out to the audience here, I don't know how many of you follow Reddit, but there is a Reddit by truckers. I think it's our truckers. And it's an interesting insight to our logistics and supply chain world as viewed by the truckers. I mean, and some things I never realized that it's a very different view. Doesn't feel as good sometimes because they're very harsh about both service providers as well as service users. But it's a good place to learn and know what they are thinking about. So next question, I'm going to take you on a different route slightly, Charlie. We've talked so much about technology. Based on your experiences, can you suggest some cases or some factors where I, as a company, if I do this, I'm more likely to be successful in my technology journey? And if I do that, I'm more likely to be a failure. Can you highlight some factors like that?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. And it might sound overly simple, but you've got to follow the money with your technology investments. So depending on what your goals and objectives are, you can quickly assess return on investment, in the most elementary and simple ways. So I think a lot of folks in business tend to procrastinate due to perfection. And like perfection is the enemy of getting stuff done, right? Nothing is ever perfect. It's never the right time. So, I'll give you a use case that in Manning's, the company that we just turned around and sold, the first couple of months as the CEO, I showed up and I shut up and I didn't say anything to anybody. I just watched the team operate and kind of listened to them and was a fly on the wall. And I quickly started to notice this person who walked around the office regularly with this box of paper. And I was really curious about what this box of paper was and, what sort of drove the volume of paper that we were kind of carrying around from place to place. And as I started to unpack the process, I quickly realized that there was a lot of invoices coming in from providers that would come in via email, or they would come in the paper mail. Some guys would even come by and drop them off at the office and, you know, shake hands and hug everybody. And all of these various invoices in these various formats would end up somehow getting, whether it was taken out of the mail or handed to us or printed off and then put into this paper box. The invoices would live in this paper box until a physical file folder was handed in whenever this shipment was done in the minds of the person working on the shipment. And this file folder contained 12 different pieces of paper at the bare minimum, sometimes more. And it was going back to like your PO example. I started asking everybody, well, what do we do with this? And why do we do this? And, you know, the real answer was nobody knew. They'd always done it that way. Some people felt more secure having a physical piece of paper in their hands. And then quickly, I went out, surveyed the market, found out that OCR document scanning technology had come, you know, a really long way in a short period of time. And that was right about the time that HubTran, the company that I mentioned earlier, was really starting to grow their market share in the US. So I was one of their early customers. We installed this, you know, entirely automated invoicing sort of settlement platform. It cost us hundreds of dollars a month, and we were able to quickly repurpose the budget dollars from that admin person into a sales focused role that was going to impact the bottom line. And so, you know, by looking at sort of where that, it's not like I needed to save the money. Like we needed to actually free up existing budget to repurpose it into another area of the business that was going to help us achieve the goals and objective of the business at that time. Previous to us buying the business, having an extra person around in the company to carry around a box of paper, that made sense because the previous owner just made his life easier. And, you know, that business was more or less his piggy bank before we bought it from him. And, you know, if he wanted to kind of keep somebody on the payroll to make his life a little more stress-free, that's great. But when you come into that sort of private equity backed, growth focused, let's professionalize this company and get it ready for a real sale, you've got to really optimize that balance sheet. And the ways you can do that is by, you know, going back to your question, you know, where do I spend my technology budget? Well, you go out and you say, look, like here's a fully burdened employee, you know, $60,000, $70,000 a year type of an opportunity. How can I, you know, ultimately get that done in a less expensive way? And so you can justify it by a cost savings. And then conversely, you can say, if I can go out and I can automate this process for other companies, then you can kind of frame out how much do I think I could save that company per year in man hours and overhead. And then you can sort of adjust your pricing based on that. So it really depends on, am I trying to justify this internally for an optimization play, or is this something that I want to turn around and sell either directly or as part of my service?
So what I hear is having a clear use case, a clear purpose of the technology supports is what would likely to make it more successful.
The use case has to marry up with the equation, right?
Yeah.
It comes down to mathematics. If you can't justify it in dollars and cents, it tends to take on a life of its own. What you don't want to do is build the Winchester mystery house, right? Where everybody gets their input and everybody gets to have one little kind of say and one gets built, and then it doesn't connect and it doesn't achieve the objective. So you've got to be laser focused and clear with what it needs to do. And you've got to be equally as focused and clear how much it's going to cost to build and how you're going to justify that.
So there's a question here from Peter on chat. Let me just read it to you. He's asking is if your company offers technology solutions to help US ports accelerate traffic to their operations, or in general, is there some technology because US port operations are ripe and need for some disruptive technologies?
Yes. So my company doesn't have anything to do with that right now. I appreciate you asking, and you always want to be able to say yes, but the answer is sometimes saying no is like equally as important. But just to kind of give you some insight into what I know, Peter, is there's a couple like contributing factors into this port congestion, and there's some technology providers that are really trying to provide creative solutions to relieve this congestion in a number of different ways. So companies like Torch Logistics, Cargomatic, Next Trucking, they've all developed, I wouldn't say integrations for all of them, but if not technology integrations, also very tight operational processes to free flow exchange containers in and out of ports. And so if you just Google those companies, you could probably find some stories out there online about how they've relieved congestion, or at least attempted to help relieve some congestion, in and out of the ports. Additionally, a company that's pretty interesting that got acquired last year in its early stages is called Secure Space. That's secure with no E. And Secure Space was developing, it's really like a micro commercial real estate platform for container and chassis storage. So as containers, sort of build up inside of a port, containers or chassis, or they're offloaded off of the ships and need to be staged before they can be trucked out. Secure Space was aggregating commercial real estate that was previously unused to safely and securely store those products while you're waiting for the trucking portion of it or the routing instructions. So those in addition to, I think, what you're seeing on the yard management side of things really start to unlock potential for ports to better coordinate, folks kind of coming in and out. But I've always wondered, like, who's going to end up building like a universal remote for all of these places, so it's just easy for these drivers to get in and out, because Lord knows nobody wants to pay extra to have a driver sitting outside of a port, and they're already pissed off as it is. It's just a calamity of errors.
Oh, yes.
Whoever can solve that problem will be much wealthier than I.
Oh, yes. And these stories that we hear from ports are really amusing sometimes, especially if it's not my cargo, it's somebody else's cargo.
Right.
And in these days, I'm even hearing stories of the cargo getting loaded on the wrong ship. So, which was very rare earlier, but suddenly I thought that should reduce. But these amusing stories are on the rise these days.
Yeah, I think, that's a byproduct of a growing industry, right? I mean, growing pains are exactly that. And, we're seeing more freight on the ocean than we've ever seen before. So it stands to reason we're going to hear about more issues and problems. And, if it's not port congestion or the Ever Given stuck in the Suez Canal, it's like maritime transportation is all of a sudden like a pretty, talked about, element. So I think COVID has really done its part in changing all of this. I don't know if any of you have dealt with what I've dealt with, but while we were staying home in quarantine, my wife wanted to buy new everything, and some of that stuff still isn't delivered because it's all sort of manufactured overseas and stuck in this chain. So I think that stuff will subside a bit, in the coming months, but I think we're going to see little flare-ups, and whenever we see a global issue going forward, everybody's going to start to connect the supply chain disruptiveness to it, because it's just a pain in everybody's ass right now,
Okay, so moving from businesses, I will move towards the end to the students. So in this technology-driven world, what advice would you have for business students? How should they position themselves? What should they learn? What should they have on their CVs so that they can be successful in this current era?
So I think the most important thing is that, one of the things that I'm really encouraged about in the younger generation, and I've got a lot of family in the university age right now, and really enjoying seeing their innovative spirit and the sort of inherent drive to just remove barriers. And not even remove them, just avoid them, just like go around and find an easier path. So I think, what I would do if I were you guys, if you're really interested and passionate about the space, is, you can't be too curious and you can't read everything because there's just an endless amount of information out there. So some quick and easy things that you guys can do, as while you're walking or driving your car or, getting your exercise, is listen to nothing but podcasts. Like get off of, the radio and listen to music other times when you're with your friends. But podcasts have all of the, secrets that are out there and all the information. And the folks that are out there and engaged in podcasts and interviews and articles and things, they're generally pretty easy to access as well. So, start building your network now. It's never too soon to connect with people. Like, punch above your weight class, think about what you really want to do and start to work towards that immediately. And don't wait until the perfect opportunity presents itself, just kind of say yes to everything that, doesn't creep you out or make you fundamentally feel, wrong. Like, try things and move fast. And if you don't like it, quit quickly. But I think as you get out there and you start to, expand your reach and decide what you want to do, you create a lot of opportunities for yourself by who you know. And then, the people that you meet along the way that can open doors for you can't prepare you for the conversation once you get it, right? So make sure you're informed, make sure you know your shit, and pay attention to what's going on. And even if you just pay attention 10% more than the rest of the people in your industry, you will see orders of magnitude more return on that 10% of knowledge, because it's going to be, a transformative 10%. It's going to be the stuff that differentiates you and gets you invited into the other conversations or the strategic discussions that show that you're not a shipping person, you're a, business person that happens to know a ton about supply chain and logistics. But the thing I love about supply chain, and this is why I love selling transportation early in my career, is you go in and you map out somebody's supply chain and all of their distributors and their suppliers and their customers. Where everybody is buried in that entire industry. You can figure out very quickly, who the players are, who to connect with. And so if that's sort of like your passion is being involved in business and if you're spending your time doing things like this right now while you're in college, which most people aren't, that shows that you probably care at least a little bit more than everybody else. So I would say if that's how you feel, then continue to build on that, and don't be ashamed of leaning into being a shipping nerd. Shipping wasn't cool even 15 years ago, but supply chain and logistics is cool now. And so, you don't have to be secretive about it. Lean into it, figure it all out, meet the people, and get after it. Bring some new ideas. Let's go.
Thank you. Yeah, anybody in the audience have a question? So the students can take notes of Charlie's suggestions, and maybe we can talk about that, of how to create that experience at the Ludgard School. But yeah, open the questions for audience. Any of you have any questions?
Yes, I have a question, Charlie.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
You're a student. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Yongtaek Min. I'm the faculty in Healthcare Operations Management. I really appreciate sharing all the insight in supply chain and logistic industry and technological changes. Yeah, in your conversation, in your talk, you mentioned about some new technological changes and some recent supply chain disruption because of the pandemic. So we have new changes, we experience new technological changes. And for example, nowadays there are a lot of industries, automotive industries are working on autopilot, and Tesla and others are developing cyber trucks and others. And so many people see those autopilot function driver will remove the real drivers. So for those new technological changes and new disruption and others, do you expect any changes in the industry? And if so, then how do you prepare to meet the demands and changes for those new changes?
Great question. And I think, the answer is that autonomous driving is already here. A number of vehicles outside of Tesla and the ones you've answered. I mean, you could buy a Nissan that'll drive you around on the highway now. And many cars, like even entry-level cars, are parking themselves. So I think inch by inch, they're getting that figured out. There's still some major sort of hurdles around keeping the driver out of the car, and certainly the truck. Pelotoning on the highway and getting into groups and knowing when that other vehicle is going to move when there's nobody moving it, like that's its whole like one major challenge on the highway that I continue to hear about. And then obviously the around town driving becomes a lot more challenging. But the industry is changing and they're getting ready whether you like it or not. When you fill out a CAPTCHA now, instead of typing in the letters, you have to click on this is a stoplight and this is a crosswalk. That's because we're training the autonomous vehicles of the future. So eventually, like, there will be enough data for those things to drive themselves around. How do you prepare? I think you got to think about where's the opportunities. If there's no driver in the car, who's going to take your DoorDash up to the up to your door? So I think there's going to be some opportunities for that. It's not the final mile. It's like the final steps. Like, who's going to do that? Is it going to be a person, waiting at the valet spot that used to park cars that is now schlepping stuff up to your apartment for you? I don't know, but I think there's going to be some interesting opportunities that arise from that, or devices that can deploy that final 10 feet. So I think there's some interesting things all around that you can start to think about. And then depending on, where your interest is, be curious, look around.
Thank you.
Hopeful that this one doesn't require.
I think there is a voice from somewhere. We're not.
I think it's Pete.
Okay.
I think it's Pete.
Yeah, it's Pete's voice.
Up and over.
Michelle, can you mute it, please?
And Robert, did you say you had a question?
I did, thank you. Wanted to hear your thoughts on where you thought we were on bringing down the costs of the physical implementation of technologies into warehouses and transportation. Robotics are wonderful, and warehouses, at Kroger's and at Amazon, they're there, but for the smaller players, it's still a major leap to be able to justify when you're not, at the billion. When you're still in the millions, that leap is that much more difficult to get into. Where do you see the next ratchet down? Where's the iPhone of today going to be at the physical? Now I got to move stuff around either on the road or at the warehouse in particular. My question was driven more at the warehouse level than anything else, but.
They get trained equipment operators, and therefore.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. So I think you're starting to see a lot more entrance into the robotics, the warehouse robotics space.
Person down below, thing goes up above. Pete, I'll be honest with you. I left that in the hands of others. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, you heard like what I heard, the need around.
You're on mute, Charlie.
Now we're talking about
Charley is muted.
Okay, I was trying to mute that other person and I muted myself, I think. So
we couldn't do it for some reason. I couldn't mute. I don't know why.
Well, I muted myself. So anyways, oh good. There he goes. So
I sent him a text. I sent him a chat note to stay silent because we were hearing his conversation. Sorry.
You're awesome, Marta. Thank you. So I think, Robert, going back to your question is like, the cost of implementation. I think really at the core of it is like, where's the tipping point to some warehouse automation becomes affordable, right? Because at the highest end of the market, you could go get these fully loaded systems and completely design and optimize your warehouse. But at the low end of the market, there's nothing. And even in the mid end or the mid range, it still becomes cost prohibitive. So I think one of the things that I've seen that's interesting is as WMS has become more democratized and web based, and there's more entrants in that space, you're now also starting to see these ancillary parts of the other parts of automation in warehouse starting to see startups and offshoots. So I recently met a company called Rabot, RABOT. And I met them through Piyush, through our friend Joe Lynch at Logistics of Logistics. And these two brothers have dreamt up this robot company since they were little. And one of them happened to get into the e-commerce fulfillment, job a few years ago. And since then, this kid has worked in 8 or 9 different warehouses and developed a few super cool low-calorie products to do things like dimensionalizing, containerization, SKU assignment, things like that. So I think as any space, you start to see the big guys are making money, and then the little guys start to like nip at the heels of these like little different areas. So I think Raybot is one example of these, super interesting people, young kids. I mean, they could be in your school. I mean, they're that young, and these two brothers are passionately innovating. So that's what really kind of keeps me motivated. I wish I had a better answer or more examples, Robert, of folks that can kind of help solve those problems. But I think, like anything else, you start looking at those guys, you'll quickly become aware of the other folks that are innovating in that space. And there has been a huge influx in venture capital on the robotics and automation side. Companies like Schematic Ventures, 8VC, Autotech Ventures, they've all made pretty big bets in robotics at the early stages in the last 3 years. So I think you'll start to see more companies mature, and that technology prices, hopefully start to come down.
Thank you. Thank you.
So-
All right, I will have to end this because we are about time. I just have 2 small things to do before I end. 3 actually. Number 1 is thank you, Charlie. Thank you for being with us and agreeing. We planned this 2 months earlier. We postponed it, but you're very flexible with us. So sincerely appreciate this, giving us your time, talking to all of us here. And I hope that we can develop this webinar further. Second, just want to let you everything under the leadership of Dr. Raj Srivastav, and with Elias, Dr. Kirch, we are trying to do different things at the Ludgate School College of Business. Probably one of the youngest supply chain majors in the country, and very innovative. One of the few ones where an internship is part of the program, and students learn a broad spectrum of courses, right from supply chain, logistics, purchasing. So that's briefly about us and something that we are starting. So I'd just like to give Hope Beagler, our student, a space for 1 minute. Hope, it's your time.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Charlie, for your time. It was so interesting to learn everything and get insight into your professional career. Speaking about that, I just want to touch on something that a couple of other students and I are starting within the supply chain management program. We are trying to start up a club on campus in hopes of, not only drawing attention to a future in supply chain management industry, but to also build career and personal development from within the club. We're offering all majors to come join within the College of Business. The hope for the club is to grow, networking opportunities, to get our foot in the door with hopefully touring facilities, speaking with professionals such as yourself, and entering various academic competitions that are foresight within other universities across the nation. With this opportunity, we would love to extend an external hand and use this opportunity as a gateway to involve, your company's knowledge to our club and use it to empower our students within the program. Extending this to the students on here and also everyone else, if interested, we are hosting our first kind of kickoff meeting Thursday, April 22nd at 6 p.m. with in a room with us. This is a great way that we're using to build leadership skills and just professional profiles and things such as that. Myself is the main point of contact. I can put my email in the chat right here, just in case. I am always on my phone and my notifications are on, so I will answer within an hour at the very max. With that being said, we would love to be able to talk with you guys and build more and hopefully use that as leverage to, grow our professional profiles and make a name for the Ludgate College of Business.
Awesome.
Thank
Congratulations.
you.
Good job, Hope.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Charlie. Most of you, we will send you a feedback form to know how this session went. And I'll also put Charlie's LinkedIn ID. Is that okay in that feedback? So if they want
Please
to
do.
connect.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yes, so I'll put Charlie's LinkedIn connect in that feedback. So maybe you can have that and connect to him, ask him questions directly. Sorry, we'll plan this better to have more questions for the speaker. And yeah, looking forward to see you next month, the second Wednesday. That's the standard time we'll hold these webinars. And pretty soon you'll have a very full schedule. Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you again.
I just wanted
Good
to
luck,
mention
everybody.
something.
Yes, Dr. Raj. Yes.
While I still have people here, I just want to mention something. And Charlie, you mentioned Project 44. And so our next webinar will feature John Fitzgerald from Project
Great.
44.
Fantastic. Tell him I said hello.
Will do.
Thank you.
Thank
He's a
you.
legend. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Charlie. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marta. We'll be talking to you.
Bye-bye.